Welcome to Name and Occupation in Depth Season 3. Today we will be talking about Abbey Road Studios and the musical British Invasion.
London was founded by the Romans in 50 AD and was called Londinium. The Romans left in 407 AD, and for the next 600 years the area was torn between the Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Vikings. In 1066, the Normans invaded the city and conquered Westminster Abbey. Their leader, King William the Conqueror, built a castle to control the area, now known as the Tower of London. Today, London is a vibrant and multicultural city with almost 9 million people.
Why did it become like this hub for music and all that? What do you guys think?
Well, that's interesting you say that, bud. I don't know. I've always wondered about that. Like, with the high quality of musicians back then, I think they were I really think they were just really influenced by the blues in North America. You know, like when you think about all those guys, they're like Clapton and Peter Green, and even Hendrix had to go to England to get his acceptance, even though he's American.
I've heard it said that it's like a mini Renaissance, kind of like in the 1920s, there was like this artist hub in Paris.
Right.
It was kind of like a similar gravitational pull towards London around the same time.
It's good that we talk about this. Same with their amps. Like, England's known for their like Marshall and stuff like that, right? You know, it's like, but are they really known for instruments? I'm not sure. Not really. Not as far as I know.
Abbey Road Studios is the most famous recording studio in the world, renowned for its creativity and technological excellence, which is what we've been talking about, guys. Mm-hmm. It is a global icon that for the last 90 years has been the musical home for the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Shirley Bassey, Ella Fitzgerald, Fela Kuti, Kate Bush, Oasis, Radiohead.
Well, imagine the emotion of just going in there and you know all the great artists who went before you, and
just the energy,
like they were there.
Yeah.
Opened in 1931.
Yep.
So back then it was predominantly classical music and then the kind of the popular music of the time. So it wasn't amplified music. Rock and roll didn't come to these shores till the mid-50s. Cliff Richard and the Shadows, that sort of thing. So when that happened, it was kind of seen as like a fad.
Right.
Like this new amplified music, you know, it won't last long. These are the execs I'm talking about here.
Sure,
like, you know, some of the classical guys as well, I imagine, would be a bit like that.
Yeah.
And it was the younger generation of engineers here who kind of learnt their craft from the classical engineers, and also some of the pop music of the time, but it still wasn't amplified. And they were kind of like adapting what they'd learnt. So yeah, Red Desk from 1958. Believe it or not, this was considered a mobile desk back then. It sort of splits into 3 sections, all valve. The whole thing is valve. The preamps, the output amps, the interamps. This console to have like faders.
Yeah, so let's talk about those. I mean, these are faders.
Yeah, most of the desks. Well, I'd say all desks before the Red 17. Everything was just like on dials.
Yep.
But someone came up with this concept of actually having faders, which is like, that's all desks now have faders,
all desks
right?
have faders.
So when I think EMI technicians went over to Berlin after the Second World War and kind of, you know, stole this technology effectively. Took it back to the UK, and EMI technicians were involved, and they backward engineered it and made the first tape machine in 1948, the British tape recorder, the BTR-1. And I think that was a massive game changer because, yeah, as I mentioned, not only did it increase the fidelity, but you could edit mono, and then later they became stereo. But all the recordings were done on the mono BTR, and then later they had twin track. So you record the band on one track and the vocals on another track, then stereo came along. But, I mean, EMI used to make everything, like radios, televisions, you name it. But they also used to make their own tape, probably from when tape came to this country in the late 40s up until the late 70s. They were smaller. They could actually get them in the control room. That changed a lot. It doesn't sound like it would, but it did change a lot because suddenly the bands, you know, were kind of starting to control the tape machine themselves, starting to manipulate the tape machine, like put their thumbs on the flanger and get that kind of flangey sort of sound, or picking up the tape and turning it over and reversing stuff, ADT, playing with the speed of the tape machine. The tape machine became an instrument in its own right, you know, and that's because it was in the room with the band, with the producer, with the engineer.
Again, sped up and slowed down, turned backwards, and they sound like trumpets. And then early days of sampling, Paul actually recorded an orchestra off a vinyl record and created a chord here.
I had a bit of a problem. How were we going to use the collection of sounds? I devised a way of playing.
It's better to
5
let the
loops
experts
at the
explain
same
it
time.
than us. We're
And
not the
if you
experts.
brought up the faders, it was like bringing up an organ stop. Each one had a
Right?
different tape loop playing all the time. So you could make your sounds as you wished.
It's like a prophecy of pop music in one song.
You can look at hip-hop and using samples or scratching in music.
Oh,
Beatles
Rick
were doing
Rubin,
that
our
until
dude.
God never knows.
Now, if I don't know where it came from. If I said, I want the radio on it, George would make it so that I could mix, and the radio would be coming through the machines, you know. But he also come up with things like, well, have you heard an oboe? Oh, which one's that? Is this one? Hey, that would be nice. You know, things like that. So it was really, we grew together, you know. And so it's like saying, it's hard to say who did what, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, he taught us a lot, and I'm sure we taught him a lot by our sort of primitive musical ability, which is all I have still, you know. I still have to have something to translate what I'm trying to say all the time. And so it was a mutual benefit.
I think the orientation's changed over the years.
Sure.
I think, if you look at those 60s recordings, the desk is facing down there.
Yep.
I think 70s, the desk is over there. And now we're over here. A lot of those rhythm sounds, like bass and drums, they would have all gone straight through a compressor like that, Fairchild, yeah. That's the sound, you know.
That's the sound.
That's the sound, or part of the sound anyway.
Yeah.
It was an accumulation of things. Yeah, we're lucky we still got this gear. Pultec EQs.
Yep.
The EMI compressors and EQs. And then in 1968, they came up with the first transistorized desks.
And this would have been on Abbey Road?
Yeah, so this was first used on the Abbey Road album, and similar desks.
Now, was Abbey Road 8-track done on 8-track?
Yeah, 8-track.
It's the only one, right? Everything else was done on 4-track?
Bits of the White Album were done on 8-track.
And so what else would have been recorded through this? What are some of the other classic?
Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, used.
I've heard of that record.
Not this particular one, but
Right.
this technology, this TG technology. I think that when they went from valves to transistor, I think it was a bit of a problem from the point of view that it behaved differently.
You can go in there, Abbey Road, you rent Abbey Road for a recording, and you could use any of the equipment that is available to you, like anything. So you can go there and use any of, you have 500 choice, 800 now actually, choice of mics, and because they have, I think you have a clip there that you're going to show later, Andre, that they have like 3, the original Studio 1, Studio 2, and Studio 3. The Studio 1 being like more orchestra studio. They're not touching anything in that studio because they're afraid that if they even paint the walls, that it will affect the sound of that room.
And how high is the ceiling here, Merrick?
That I don't know off the top of my head.
But probably about 3 stories or so.
Yeah. I mean, when most people think of what a recording studio looks like, this isn't kind of it, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesnn't sound as big as it looks.
No, it doesn't.
If that makes sense.
It's drier than what I would have thought it would be.
Yeah. Unlike Studio One, where you know, unless you're going after some like kind of very specific sound, you wouldn't do a band in Studio One. It'd be too big, too reverberant. It would be crazy. And you wouldn't necessarily want to record where you couldn't physically record a orchestra in Studio 3, for example. But this room's kind of in the middle. You can kind of like, whatever you throw at this room, it just kind of works.
So you guys do smaller ensembles in here?
Smaller string sections done in. A lot of pop string overdubs.
They came in for Return of the Jedi soundtrack, and they actually rented the London's Philharmonic to come into the studio. To come and play and record the soundtrack. Wow. And they were like, we are not ever going to record anywhere else after they experienced the sound that came out of Studio One, because that's where they recorded.
Pretty epic.
Yeah, definitely.
So apparently they started with about 500 microphones, and they're up to like 800 mics that they have to play with.
Like the 3 mics that come to mind for me, anyways, personally, is like
story about
Michael, Michelle, and Mikael. Like, those are 3 mics.
Bunch of wonderful microphones here that I know some of them. Can you tell me about each one of these?
Yeah, sure. So this is the EMI RM1B. EMI used to make their own microphones back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
So when the studios first opened, it would have been Western Electric microphones and EMI made microphones. The German microphones didn't come onto the scene until later on. So this is one of them. I think
How old is this mic?
This is like 1949. Yeah. So there's only like 2 of these in existence that we know of. The U47s are actually, late 40s as well.
Yeah.
I mean, these mics, it's one thing.
Mics like U47s, though, are made, there's so many different versions of them now. These are the original ones.
These are the original, yeah.
Right, but people have dissected these and many people know about these, how these are constructed.
Yeah. Another Neumann classic, this is the M50.
Yep. There's the M49, there's the M50. Wait, what is the difference between an M49 and M50?
So the M49, funnily enough, was the more popular microphone here at Abbey Road. It's now the reverse, but the M49 has got the switchable polar patterns.
Yeah.
Which I think at the time was like quite a big deal.
That was unusual.
That's right. Change the patterns, so you could go from omnidirectional, picking up everything, to cardioid, just picking up at the front, figure of 8, where you pick up the front and the back.
Yep.
So there are a lot of M49s at Abbey Road. We still got a few of them, but now we've got more M50s. People just seem to gravitate towards the sound of the M50 for omnidirectional. It's just like a fuller, richer sort of sound. So we've designed with Childhood Limited, with Wade, over in Iowa. So they're unusual mics. I mean, Wade always likes to kind of, look at the old EMI gear and kind of, add a slight modern twist on it. D20 on the kick drum normally. D19 was a really popular.
D19.
That was a workhorse microphone. There used to be apparently like dozens of those mics here. We've got 3 left now.
Specs. Wow. And that's the
it's incredible.
12mm diaphragm. All the works are inside. There's a valve in the middle. Probably hard to see.
Where's the valve?
Show it. Just for.
That little tiny thing there?
That black thing, yes.
So this is what Lester described as the golf ball, the Perspex golf ball.
Yeah, it is exactly.
There's the tiny diaphragm.
Yeah.
Half-inch diaphragm. And this in there, lying sideways, is the valve, or as Americans would say, the tube.
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't say tube, they say tube.
Like he was hired in January 1970, and like he had no formal training. He came from EM because before it was called Abbey Road Studios, it was called EMI.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So it wasn't formally changed to Abbey Road Studios until 1976. So he was hired into EMI in the January 1970s, and they needed a mic guy. And he was like, "That sounds cool." So he learned everything about mics, the ins and outs of how it all works. Like I saw an interview on him. He has this ledger, like a handwritten ledger, about every mic he fixed.
I know. That was a great interview.
Yeah,
he's all that old.
He's the new tech guy there that replaced the guy who
he's been there a long time.
Yeah, since he was a kid. But look at it, eh? The room
he's
looks...
Lester's protege?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And that room is of the rooms.
Look at the room, though. It looks
Nothing has changed.
Yeah, but it doesn't look special or anything, eh? It doesn't, like...
And you guys, we could go and rent the room and record some songs. Like, seriously.
Yeah, we should.
I don't even know how much it is to go, but like we could go and like rent it out and like have fun. Why not?
Right? For an hour.
Speaking of great rooms, we've got some great instruments as well. This is the Challen piano. These were kind of like songwriting pianos that were just kind of lying around in the studios. There were a lot of songwriting rooms here, so the idea being it's just a smaller piano that you could sit down and your vocal could sit over the top quite easily, instead of sitting there with a big grand piano. So they weren't anything particularly special, but they ended up being used on some pretty special recordings.
For example,
Fool on the Hill piano. This one. Yeah, and a lot of the White Album ended up using this Challen piano as well. These and things like the Celeste and the Hammond organ and the Mrs. Mills piano. These are just instruments that were lying around, but those pop bands in the 60s were always striving to find new sounds. So they'd use whatever was lying around.
So did you know that the Beatles showed up shortly after 10 a.m., as the story goes, and recorded their first album on February 11th, 1963, in one day? And the record was Please Me,
Wow.
which went to the top of the charts and stayed there for 30 weeks.
It's often not mentioned how much they earned their stripes with all the road gigs in Hamburg, in everywhere. Like they were constantly on the road, constantly playing, all the time. That's what got them so good. This lady I was talking to years ago, she was saying about the Beatles how sure they had the talent, but they were also there at the right time, right place, with that talent, with that vacuum of creativity that was like there was nothing going on. Yeah. Like North America had Elvis and whatever.
Well, they were inspired by the blues, right?
Absolutely. So they filled that vacuum and they took it and they owned it. I like that you're posting that.
And you know what? I have a little story about that picture. So right before they wanted to do something really exciting for their album, and they were thinking about maybe going to different kinds of countries. They were like, where are we gonna go to take this epic picture for to kind of highlight our record?
Egypt or
they were like, where are we gonna go? And then they were like, one of them said, let's just walk across the street. Why don't we just walk across the street out of this place that made us? Because they knew what they had. They knew what Abbey Road Studios was for them. They knew what EMI Studios was for them at the time, because they only changed the name from EMI to Abbey Road Studios after this record was released.
Right.
And that was
so it got sold then, I guess?
No, it was actually
just a rebranding. Just rebranding.
It was just a simple rebranding because the Beatles had become so huge by that point that they and it was free. The recording studio for them was built into their contract. They did not pay a cent for any of the time that they spent there recording all that music.
So they were sleeping there, eating there, staying there, everything.
Yeah.
They basically lived there. They were vibrating at a higher frequency for sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All
completely off the charts. But the Volkswagen Beetle that we see there on the classic album, which by the way, that was their first album that there's no inclination. Their name isn't anywhere on the album, right? And they just released it like that, so on and so forth. Well, the Volkswagen Beetle that's on the Beatles album cover of Abbey Road, it's in a museum in Germany, I think Hamburg or something, or Hanover or somewhere. But the license plate kept getting stolen from the Beetle, from the guy, kept getting ripped off, right? It's like
that's awesome.
Whatever
Chris.
it says.
I did not know that.
The Beatles are not the only ones that liked this Abbey Road, right? Like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd.
A lot of great albums.
Right? Abbey Road kind of created this whole British invasion.
It just keeps building from there on, right? After Pink Floyd, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, you got great artists that,
in the 60s, exactly. They had Jerry and the Pacemakers. They had all those guys, right? Like the Hollies, so many wonderful bands.
Animals.
Just they were just like wildfire. And Joe Cocker, the Beatles remake with a little help from my friends. Well, that's Jimmy Page playing the electric guitar on that, right?
Really?
On so many of those old classics there, I Can See for Miles by The Who, that's him, right? So he was already established, And then the Yardbirds came around, then the new Yardbirds, and then voila.
Yardbirds was Clapton and Page together?
It was Clapton with the other Yardbirds, and Clapton left because it was going too poppy, and he wanted to go into the blues. That's when he left, and he joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers, right? And then after that, they asked Jimmy Page, but he didn't, because he was buds with Clapton, he didn't want to like overstep, so he suggested their buddy Jeff Beck. Right. And then after Jeff Beck, they needed a bassist, because I think the bassist was Chris Draga, and he left or something like that. I'm not quite sure on the history there, but Jimmy Page jumped in as bassist. And then the Yardbirds disbanded, so then he formed a new band called the New Yardbirds, and that's when he formed Zeppelin.
I wonder,
right? Which, by the way, if we're going to talk about it, Keith Moon and Steve Winwood were going to join, and it was just this idea, and I think it was Keith Moon who said to Jimmy Page, "It'll go over like a lead balloon," right? You know what I mean? And that's where the name Led Zeppelin came from.
It's almost magical what happened there, and it's really hard to capture the essence of how or why and what.